So many of you who view the videos on my channel, particularly those of you who share with me a sense of resonance with the Pure Land tradition, will have found that I have a playlist called the Tannisho. And the Tannisho, as I have described it before, is one of the most wonderful of the Pure Land scriptures. It basically purports to indicate in specific terms some of the statements by the founder of true Pure Land Buddhism, or Shin Buddhism, by its founder Shinran Shonin. But again, it wasn't written by Shinran, it was written by Yenbo, who was a disciple of Shinran, and who wrote this wonderful work based on his concern about the deviations from Shinran's original teaching that seem to be cropping up among some of the followers of the Pure Land approach. Now, I have previously recited two other versions of this scripture. One was put out by the Numata Center for Buddhist Translation and Research, and the other by Ryukoku University in Kyoto, Japan. But on this occasion, I want to recite yet a third version that is part of the Shin Buddhism translation series, and in this particular case, the actual title is referred to as A Record in Lament of Divergences. So here we go. Yenbo starts with a preface where he says, "When I humbly reflect on the past when the late master was alive," and let me mention there that supposedly Yenbo actually was alive when Shinran was alive, so he supposedly was a direct hearer of the things that Shinran preached and said. So he said, "When I humbly reflect on the past when the late master was alive, and the present in my foolish mind," and his explication of his own mind as being foolish, totally consistent with Shinran in the sense of, again, the Shin Buddhist faith leaves us with a deep sense of humility. "When I humbly reflect on the past when the late master was alive, and the present in my foolish mind, I cannot but lament the divergences from the true Shinjin that he conveyed by speaking to us directly, and I fear that there are doubts and confusions in the way followers receive and transmit the teaching." So again, Shinjin is that basic concept within Shin Buddhism as articulated by Shinran that I think Al Bloom most accurately characterized as entrusting. We entrust in the vow that Dharmakara made that assures us of our salvation in the next life. "I cannot but lament the divergences from the true Shinjin that he conveyed by speaking to us directly, and I fear there are doubts and confusions in the way followers receive and transmit the teaching." So his goal in this treatise is to clarify doubts and confusions. "For how is entrance into the single gate of easy practice possible unless we happily come to rely on a true teacher whom conditions bring us to encounter? Let there be not the slightest distortion of the teaching of other power with words of an understanding based only on personal views." So again, emphasizing the fact that this is the easy path in contrast with the difficult path or the path of sages or the holy path, which Nagarjuna originally made that distinction between the difficult path and the easy path. And there are many doctrines, many scriptures within Mahayana Buddhism that make that same distinction. You know, the path of sages is great for people who, for one thing, maybe are in a monastery and have the opportunity to devote full time to meditating and worshiping. But, you know, most of us have a life that we need to organize in terms of family, work, all the various problems that we encounter living in a modern day culture. And Shinran also lived in a difficult time, way more difficult than ours, in terms of all kinds of natural disasters and conflicts among people, etc., which is part of what caused him and others at that time to feel that they were in a period of decline with respect to their ability to really do the kinds of things that would be necessary, for example, to follow the Bodhisattva path and to become Buddhists in this life. So there was an easy path, and thankfully Amida Buddha, he created this easy path, this path of reliance upon other power that allows us to, in spite of our limitations, in spite of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, to have a way to gain what all Buddhists wish to gain, which is the attainment of Buddhahood, or Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. But here we do it not on the basis of our own effort, on the basis of our own merit, but on the basis of the merit that Dharmakara Bodhisattva accumulated over the eons of time, which he then can transfer to us in the form of giving us the opportunity to be reborn in his pure land of bliss. So he's saying, for how is entrance into the single gate of easy practice possible unless we happily come to rely on a true teacher whom conditions bring us to encounter? And of course, from Yenbo's perspective, Shinran is that true teacher. Let there be not the slightest distortion of the teaching of other power with words of an understanding based only on personal views. And I will say here that in the context of the spiritual awakening, so-called, that I had back in 1979, it now being the first week of 2020, so that was over 40 years ago, that part of why I gravitated toward Mahayana Buddhism was because of its broad range of various kinds of teachings that I thought could be compatible with and resonate with people of various personality types. But then specifically to hone in on the Pure Land approach, I knew that that was the approach that more tens of millions of Buddhists in the world had found meaning in than any other of these forms that pertain to the path of sages. From another angle, I felt and believed that it was important to promulgate and articulate and explain my experience within a tradition that had hundreds and hundreds of years and hundreds of millions of followers, as opposed to some kind of idiosyncratic, or what he calls here as an understanding based only on personal views. Now, he's talking about an understanding of Pure Land Buddhism based on personal views, but it's also possible to have an understanding of a non-dual experience, of a spiritual awakening type experience based on personal views, or based on the views of a smaller number of people, or a smaller type of group. I'll just reference here, for example, and I have no quarrel with people, to be honest, that do this, but many people, if you watch different YouTube videos, they will talk about their experience of non-duality. And I think, for example, the whole series on science and non-duality is a great series. And again, there are many kinds of people who describe their experience. I think one of the other venues is Consciousness TV, something along that line, where they use their own language and their own way of communicating about this experience that, while it's sublime in its own way, it is not tied in with a broader tradition. And somehow or other, I felt that there was value. Or I'll say I felt it and I did it, but I didn't really do it. And in that sense, again, that Amida finds us. Amida draws us to his particular belief system, his particular story, if you will, his expedient method for helping us to understand our experience. And that's how I see this as having happened with me. And it was through a gradual process. First of all, again, focusing on worshiping, focusing on repetition of the name, as in the more generic form of Pure Land Buddhism, and then ultimately relying totally on Amida with a recognition that he was the one that called me to him. So, one more brief sentence in this preface by Yenbo in the Tannisho. Here, then, in this volume, I set down in small part the words spoken by the late Shinran Shonin that remain deep in my mind, solely to disperse the doubts of fellow practicers. Now, at this point, I want to give perhaps a little apology for the fact that I've gone on and on with various sidebars as I recited this preface. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to recite it again nonstop and give you assurance that I'm not going to be doing this throughout the Tannisho. At least that's not my intent right at this moment in time. So if you're interested in this but don't really want to hear my babbling, be assured that you'll be able to hear the actual text of the Tannisho nonstop on hopefully a basis that reflects some good audio quality and that you can just sort of savor and take in for what it means to you. So again, Yanbo in the preface to the Tannisho. When I humbly reflect on the past when the late master was alive, and the present in my foolish mind, I cannot but lament the divergences from the true Shinjin that he conveyed by speaking to us directly. And I fear that there are doubts and confusions in the way followers receive and transmit the teaching. For how is entrance into the single gate of easy practice possible unless we happily come to rely on a true teacher whom conditions bring us to encounter? Let there be not the slightest distortion of the teaching of other power with words of an understanding based only on personal views. Here, then, I set down in small part the words spoken by the late Shinran Shonin that remain deep in my mind, solely to disperse the doubts of fellow practicers. Namu Amida Buts. Namu Amida Buts. Namu Amida Buts.